Having examined the process of ingesting data into the platform, and specifically in this case, we saw an example how data was ingested through a website, which is a retail company, and we were able to verify that data was actually available in terms of the profile record, and we also looked at the events in the last demo. Now that the data has made it into the platform, like we said, one of the features that are a part of the core of AEP is the ability to ensure compliance with rules and regulations in terms of accessibility of users to the data and also applications to the data. And in doing so, we do have a data usage and labeling enforcement framework that allows you to define the levels at which you can access the data if you're a user or an application, and what is the granular level of accessibility. Typically, in every implementation, data governance is everyone's responsibility because you do care that you want to make sure that the data is being used and you are adhering to rules and regulations, complying with what you have guaranteed the customers whose data you are collecting. However, there are specific roles that have responsibility for ensuring that the data usage and labeling and enforcement is properly defined, and typically is anybody who has the role of a data steward. The data steward is one that will provide the framework configuration for anybody else. So for example, if I am a marketer and I want to use data for personalization, or I want to use the data for exporting it for data science activities, for me to be successful in that, it has to be defined within the framework of the governance, and that is the responsibility of the data steward. So whatever the data steward does, it affects anybody else within that set of roles that you can see from here. So the platform, as part of its core features, has two major elements. One is the metadata that allows you to define the accessibility to a data set and the control associated with the fields within the data set or all fields within the data set. And that is through labels. The second category is the policies, and the policy defines what marketing actions are allowed or not allowed to be taken on a specific data, and that applies to specifically the destinations. And then the third aspect of it is the enforcement, which means if I'm trying to export data for data science activities, and I have selected a record that is, or a field that is restricted, that will basically violate that. And in violating that, it does not allow me to export that specific data to perform my specific actions. But for us to do that as a data steward or whoever has the responsibility for ensuring compliance with rules and regulations, we need to understand what data usage labels are available and what marketing actions are also provided through the privacy services that is included within the core features of AEP. So let's start with the data usage labels. Like I said, they are mostly metadata that actually categorize the data for contractual obligations relating to the governance policies associated with the data. The second category is the identity label that allows you to define what can be identified or what profile can be contacted specifically. The last one is the geofencing through the sensitivity level. That categorizes whether you want to pinpoint a particular location of a customer or you want to actually broadly identify customers. And these are all obligations that you have to take seriously if you are functioning as a data steward on making sure that you adhere to rules and regulations. And it has impact on subsequent activities that will require the use of that data, whether you are going to do an insight analysis, whether you are also going to activate segments that has some restrictions in terms of data usage labels, or that you are going to export it for specific marketing actions of your choice. Now we're going to take a look at the process for defining the data governance and where we can find the labels and how we can apply them. And then we also try to discover where the privacy services are in terms of the marketing actions that are allowed for the export of the data as part of the audience. As a follow-up to the discussion around the ability to secure the data which has been ingested and to provide for permissions in terms of accessibility and deciding on how the data can be used. In this demo, we're going to take a look at and navigate the services that provides for selecting control and determining the ability to use a particular data set or data associated with the profile for specific marketing actions. If you recall, when we talked about the individual workspaces that is included within the platform UI, there are two locations where we can look at the semantic control and the ability to use the data for specific marketing actions. One is under the privacy, and in the privacy, you will find there is the policies that determines what the data can be used for. And these are more associated with the destination, so we're going to hold off on that, but you can see a couple of them. The ability to export to third party, the ability to use it for cross-site targeting, the ability to do email targeting, and so forth. And these are all out-of-the-box policies that have been created, but as a user, depending on your role, you have the ability to also custom create your own policies. And we will be applying this to the destinations when we come to that demonstration. For now, we are going to talk about the ability to define the data usage labeling and enforcement at the data set level, and that can be found under data management. So if you go to the left pane and you expand data management, the data usage labeling and enforcement, which are the metadata, are applied at the data set level, or they are applied in the fields in the data set. So I'm going to go ahead and select data set under data management workspace, and I'm going to take a look at the web traffic that were generated and secure, determine how we are going to control accessibility to the data set or the fields within the data set. In this case, I'm going to filter it by web. And when we did the Luma data ingestion, the data went into the website registration when we actually generated the web traffic. So I'm going to select the AEP demo website interaction dataset, which is the destination for the data to be ingested. And if you look through here, you can see that there are a couple of batch generations that were successful today. But that's not the importance here. The one that I'm going to be interested in here is the data governance. So if I go ahead and click on data governance tab, it will then give me access to the data sets and also the individual fields within the data sets. In this particular use case for navigation, if you look at the data set level, there are two labels that have been set, which means if you set a label on the data set, every field within the data set inherits that data users labeling and enforcement. In this particular case, the identity labels were applied at the dataset level, and you can see that every other field in here derives that labels and provides for enforcement. In this particular case, the identity actually allows us to determine whether we can contact a specific person or indirectly contact that person. The second label that we talked about was the sensitivity for geofencing. And then the third one was the contractual label. So for this here, it means that every enforcement for I1 and I2 will be applied to every field. But let's say, for instance, that we only want to then provide for sensitivity not to directly contact persons by location. And so in this case, I'm going to filter
the location, and I will choose the location field. And for the location field, I'm going to provide some restrictions in terms of what we can or cannot do. So once I select the location, on the top right hand side shows that I've selected one field, and I'm going to define the labels for the control to that particular field. So when I click on the edit labels, right away you can see that I cannot make any changes to the identity labels. But I could, for this particular case, if I expand the sensitivity label, I could specifically indicate that I don't want, in the process of exporting and using this data for specific marketing actions, I do not want that particular location to be directly identified by latitude and longitude. I want to make it broadly applicable. So I could click on apply the S2, which means the data can be used to determine broadly defined geofence area for location data associated with a particular profile. And when I do so, and I click the save changes, you can immediately see that when I do that, it has the application of sensitivity label applied to it. And I have the option not to confirm that I can actually go and delete it. I have the ability to go and change that label. Again, if you select and you go to edit, you have the ability to apply sensitivity label to restrict the exact location by latitude and longitude. If you click on the sensitivity label to broadly define the geofence area of a particular field and you click save, once you save that, it shows it up on the top right hand side here. But if you don't want it, you can go and delete, remove that label, and that goes away right away. Uh, that is one aspect of the data usage and enforcement. You can only do it per data set. It's not broadly applied for every data set.
In the last few demos and lectures, we've talked about the process for onboarding data from multiple data sources. We've talked about when the data get ingested into the platform through any one of the selected methods. We've seen how to use a website to get a customer, registered customer, to interact with the platform and actually generate a web traffic. And we viewed that in the exercise that we did. We also said we have to make sure that we secure the control of accessibility to the data while it is in the repository managed by the platform. And so we talked about data governance through the data usage labeling enforcement and the privacy services that defines how the data can be used when you are exporting it. Now we want to talk about how do we use the data that have been ingested into the platform. And to be able to do that, we have to create a segment. And creating a segment requires us to understand the segmentations service feature that is bundled in the core API, in the core AEP. That feature allows you to define a set of rules that describe the characteristics of the profile fragment that is common across the profiles whose information you want to actually activate as an audience and export it to a particular destination choice. So for you to create a segment, segments are created on the real-time customer profile data store, not on the data lake, as I mentioned previously. And the definition of what qualifies as a segment can be done on specific attributes. It could also be done with behavior types. It could also be done on existing audiences or a combination of attributes, behavior, and audiences. So you could use any one of these criteria to define your business rules that qualifies a segment profile into that segment. Once you are able to create a segment, then the next thing is how do we activate the segment as an audience to a destination for a specific market and actions. Now, The question now becomes, how do we actually use the segmentation service to build a segment? Segment can be built in one of two ways. You can build a segment from within the platform UI by going to the customer workspace, and under the customer workspace, you'll find the segmentation section that will then will launch the segment builder. You could also use the platform API, and usually the platform API will be used for a more complex programmatic approach to building segments. Typically, marketers will use Segment Builder within the platform UI, but if it is a very complex scenario that the platform UI will not allow you to do that, if you're not a data engineer and you don't have the background to write programming logic, then you can give the data engineer or a programmer to help you build that from within a platform API using a REST-compatible client tool like Postman. Below here are two examples of a business requirement for creating a segment. So let's say you are a marketer and your management wants you to create a segment to capture profile fragments who have actually viewed products on your website but have not made a purchase. So in this category, you are looking at cart abandonment so that you can target them by providing them an offer that they cannot refuse. So that's a good, very good use case. And typically this one here is only associated with the event type. The second example here is your management wants you to generate a segment, and that segment is targeting female customers between the age of 20 and 40 who have actually lived in Michigan or in Georgia. Every one of these elements here, it's actually about attributes. Gender, female, age between 20 and 40 is an attribute. The state, Michigan or Georgia, is an attribute. Like I said earlier on, you can combine both of them where you will be looking for a male customers or a female customers between the age of 20 and 40 who lived in Michigan and have actually viewed a product but did not end up making a purchase. So that could be a segment with profile fragment of interest for your specific marketing actions. So now let's look at the process for doing that. The process for creating a segment is if you are using the platform UI to create a segment, you log into the platform, you identify the attributes or events or existing audience that will be part of your definition, and typically this will be done from within the UI by the marketers. When you create a profile, you create a segment from within the segment builder. Your segment can be qualified for one of two segmentation types. It could either be a streaming segmentation or it could be a batch segmentation. You don't get to choose how the segments get qualified. The rules will evaluate your segment definition and qualify them for evaluation either as a streaming segmentation or a batch segmentation. What is the categorization or characteristics of a streaming segmentation? Typically, they are in response to a user activity. So for example, I could go to a website and I could add one or more items to my shopping cart. And when I do so, I have an infinite amount of items that I can add. So I can go back and add more. I can go back and add more. So anytime I am looking for a segment definition rule for people who have added item to the shopping cart, that is going to be triggered to actually qualify that segment for that particular profile fragment. So we could have multiple people adding items to the shopping cart. So it's going to be in response to a user activity, and this is constantly evaluated based on the newly generated event. That's how a profile fragment gets evaluated as a streaming segmentation. The second category is the batch segmentation, and this typically will move all qualifying profiles at once into an audience. It's evaluated as a set schedule. Typically, the default is every 24 hours, but that can also be brought down to a couple of hours or by using what we call the incremental segmentation. So that is also possible to bring it down. Once you define your segments and it's evaluated, then you can save your segment with a unique name, and you can actually view a sample of the qualifying fragments within that particular segment. If you are then ready to actually export the profile fragments in the qualifying segment, then you can activate it on a destination. Creating a destination typically is the responsibility of a data engineer. Creating a segment could be primarily the responsibility of marketers, but you could also engage a data engineer if the segment definition is a complex one that could be created through an API approach. In this demonstration, which is going to be the fourth demonstration, I'm going to show you the process of launching your segment builder from within the platform UI. We're going to look at the business requirement that allows us to create a segment, and then we are going to preview the profile fragments that qualifies for that segment.
As a follow-up to the discussion we had about the process for creating segments, we're going to try to create a segment to capture all male profiles who have viewed a Nadia Elemental product through the Luma website. And if you recall, we said segments can be built in one of two ways. You can build it from the segment builder within the platform UI, or you can build it from an API. But in this particular case, we're going to do that through the platform UI. So to build a segment based on the business requirement for male customers who have viewed a Nadia product element, the first thing you need to do is to go to the customer workspace in the left pane and expand it. Once you expand that, you will find that there is a segment sections, and if you click on that, it will give you an overview, a list of all segments that have been created, and you will see a number of tabs that explain the breakdown of the segment, the churn, which is the percentage change over time since the last time it was evaluated, the number of profile counts within each segment, the evaluation method, whether it's a batch or streaming or an edge segment, and when it was created and last time it was evaluated. So in our case, we're going to build the segment for male profiles who have viewed an Nadia product. So we're going to start with the attributes first. So to do that, we go to the top right hand side and click the Create Segment button. Once you do that, it launches the Segment Builder UI. And as you can see from the fields, segments can be created from attributes. They can be created from events. They can also be created using existing audiences. And on the right-hand side, you see the segment properties. So we're going to start with the attributes because we are looking for customers whose gender is equal to male, and that is an attribute. And so if you look at the attribute structure for the SDM individual profile, and if you click on it, it shows you the sub-objects, and under the sub-object, you will find the person sub-object, and in the person sub-object, you will find the gender attribute. So what we need to do is to drag the gender attribute into the canvas. So we go and drag it and put it in the segment builder user interface. Once you do that, since this is an enumerated field, it gives you a number of parameters or a number of operators that you can use to define gender. If you drop down the menu, it's equal to, does not equal to, exists or does not exist. In this case, we are looking for gender is equal to male, and it happened to be an enumerated field. So what you can do is to drop down the value menu and choose male customers. That's what we're doing. I am an incrementalist, so I want to build it once at a time. Under the segment property, if you then click on the refreshed estimate, it just gives you an approximate number of customer profile fragments that qualifies based on gender is equal to male. From here, it shows you that we have about 203,000, and out of that, 2.7 thousand qualifies based on that gender, and it forms about 1.35% of the total profile count in the profile store. The second thing that we need to do is we are looking for the event where a customer views the product and the product name is equal to Nadia element. So to do that rule, we need to click on the Events tab, and the web traffic is part of the XDM experience event. And under the XDM experience event, you can find the tenant name, and you will find a product data. And under the product data, the two things that we are looking for is the product interaction and the product name. So let's start with defining the product interaction first, where the product interaction is equal to product view. So we drag that and drop it into the rule builder. And in the value, we're going to type product view. And most of the time, if this is a drop-down menu, you can simply select it. But since it's not, we are just simply going to enter that. Before I add the second event field, I will always want to go and refresh my estimate. And you can see that it went from 2007 to about 219 based on the product interaction tab equal to view. So the next thing we want to do is to now add another event field to say that if the product name is equal to Nadia element. So we drag that and add it inside the rule builder. And over here, we're going to type the Nadia element shell. And in the Nadia element shell, if you hit enter, that is another qualifier. So its product interaction is equal to product view, and the product name is equal to Nadia element. So if you do a refresh, recall we have 219 here, and if you do a refresh of that estimate, it goes from the 219 to 180 profile fragments that qualifies. And you could actually view a sample of the profile as you are defining your rules. So if you click on the view profiles, you will see a sample of those profiles, at least some of the elements that we're using building the rule. It's actually reflected here. You can see that they are all males. I'll go ahead and hide the profile, and then subsequently I need to save the segment. So we are going to make this semantically meaningful by providing a name. So we can say male customers viewed Nadia prod. And I'm just simply going to leave it that way or put a date on it, maybe 2022. And that's good enough. So once we do that, we also can provide it a description that allows anybody who wants to maintain it subsequent to know what that is going to be. So once we build that, we can go ahead and do a save and close. And when you do a save and close, as long as the name does not conflict with an existing one, it will save it, and you will see a summary of that particular segment, and it tells you that the total estimated is 180, and no new audience have been updated since it was last evaluated, and you can see a sample at the bottom of the screen that tells you that you have the appropriate values. You could also go to the configure icon, and in this case you can choose gender, and if you look at this, you can see that all of them are males based on the sample that we see here. So that actually gives you an idea of what that segment profile count will be. And in this particular case, if we go back into the segments and we look at the segment that we just built, look at it right here. Over here, it tells you that it's an earth segmentation. Remember, we said you don't have the choice to choose how it is evaluated. It's either going to be a streaming, a batch, or an edge segmentation. If I move my mouse over it, it doesn't show me the breakdown immediately. It refreshes after a few refresh. So that's how you can create a segment combining attributes with events and identifying how many profile accounts qualify for that segment.